Welcome to Land Language, the podcast transforming landscapes from toxic to regenerative. We're your host, Brit from Blueprint Earth,
and co-host Bethany from Bethany Rydmark Landscapes.
We explore beautiful, functional design through conversations with scientists, vendors, contractors, and designers who are changing the industry.
Whether you're in the field or at the drafting table, join us as we explore regenerative practices that care for people, place, and planet.
Let's dig in.
We're so excited to have Xanthe White with us today. Xanthe, thank you for joining us. This is the first time we've had a guest from overseas joining us via the screen. Thanks for calling in from Auckland, New Zealand. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you.
I would love to introduce you to my friend Brit. I've told her about our visits in the past. I really became a fangirl because of the magical world of the internet. I found your beautiful photos of gardens on Instagram and started poking along from across the way. You'll remember I studied a little bit of my undergrad landscape architecture studies down in New Zealand, so I have this affinity in my heart anyway. And so when I found your account and saw the plant palettes you were working with and the beautiful materials and the gorgeous photos, and then really continued to read the captions and understand a little bit more about the heart behind what you were doing in practice, I became an overseas fangirl. And back in 2024, I was able to fly down and spend a little bit of time with you in your studio. So I came and told Brit, we have to talk to Xanthe. Even though you're not practicing here in the Northwest, I know you've got some roots in the Northwest that I want to ask you about. And I just want to have a conversation about what it's like to practice and these lessons that you've learned after all these years of being in the world with people and materials and plantings. So Brit meet Xanthe, Xanthe meet Brit. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm thrilled. Just hearing a bit of your process that you are trusted with from your clients and them trusting you not just because you're an expert, because you've written 2 books with one on the way, but also because you clearly have this way of connecting humans to the land, which allows you to be empowered within that and to have people feel that so that you can carry them into a more holistic relationship with the land is something that I'm really excited to hear from you in terms of your process and to learn about that has brought you to this place to be on that kind of a journey with your clients. It's very special. So thank you, Xanthe.
Thank you. I think it's really awesome that you use the word process. And I think that is the key thing that makes place kind of universal in a sense, is that in terms of the processes that we undertake, the human relationship is the critical one when we're looking at landscape design, because we are looking at the human ecology and we're looking at how people interact with the land around them. And so it's the process through which we look at and examine that relationship that is the key characteristic. The land itself should be acknowledged through good process and through people coming to have an understanding of recognizing what is there and being observers and interactive and learning how to interact with the places they're in. I think us as landscape designers, we're looking at how to teach people how to approach those connections and to build beautiful relationships between spaces and land, and to create poetry through beauty and ideas and questions and queries and challenges and different ways of seeing things to provoke stronger, healthier connections, right?
Mm-hmm. I get goosebumps. I love your invocation even of poetry, right? This is such a beautiful way to live as we're anchored in a place, as we're connected to the things growing around us and to the people that we interact with in all parts of life, but especially in the design process. You're getting to know one another, client and designer. You're getting to know your builders that you're involving in bringing their beautiful and hard labor to make these things happen. You're getting to know the palette of living beings that you're using for design. All of those relationships, what an amazing web. It's not just a one and done. We're picking a paint color and slapping it on a wall and we've designed a space. We are getting to help spin these magical webs of connection. Ah, I love it. Xanthe, would you tell us a little bit about what brought you into the field of landscape architecture to begin with? And maybe even along the way, you could mention a little bit about this stint in the Pacific Northwest that I discovered when we were chatting.
So I guess I was brought up by hippie parents, hippie software designing, writing parents, intelligent, hardworking, inquiring minds that brought me up really with a very open connection with the natural world. So my father had been a mountaineer and my mother had been a big traveler. From when I was little, we were always outside in the landscape, the natural landscape. mainly. And then when I was about 5, my dad took on a contract with Boeing. And so we moved to Seattle for a couple of years. So I spent a couple of years on Mercer Island when I think it was quite a little kind of forest community. I believe now it's a little bit flashier,
Quite
fancier, and
different.
maybe shiny. Yeah.
Yes.
But for me, I think of that place as this little island with woods and squirrels and a little kind of wharf that I could jump off into the lake. And so even there, and we spent a lot of time at Rainier. I remember like going for walks and walking along the path with my mum and finding a big pile of steaming hot bear poo. And my mum being like, there is steam coming out of it. We should probably walk slow now.
So calm of her.
Words. So Rainier and that area was part of the landscape that I was brought up seeing and connecting with. And we were really encouraged to inquire and live and see and observe what was happening in the world around us. And so I think I went through school and I really had no idea what I was meant to be. I didn't feel like I fitted nicely into a little box. And then I got a job just gardening, and I had family friends who'd been landscape designers. And through that gardening, I just suddenly I saw something that was indefinite and infinite and connected to so many things that I did understand, to my grandmothers who grew food or who were watercolor painters and saw beauty, to my parents who were adventurers, and to tramping and climbing, and to people and to spaces and well-being. And I was like, there's quite a lot I can learn here. And I can be outside. I don't have to be in a box.
Totally.
Not all the time, anyway. Yeah.
I mean, it's clear having that childhood or having that desire as a human early in life brings you to this kind of a field. I think it's that life also that probably makes you want to do good in this field, because there's a lot of good in this field and there's a lot of quite toxic. You probably get to and have to in some ways vet your clients, and then also kind of vet the contractors you work with to build and trust them with this process of construction and doing things in a way that might look a little different than the way that the masses do it.
That's interesting, because when I did start out building, so I started out building things myself. And we've recently gone back to building things ourselves, because we've found that we have some beautiful contractors that we work with as well, but actually it doesn't matter what your ideas are and what your intentions are. If you're selling those out to other people, when I say selling, you don't get paid.
Right.
But if you're just contracting the responsibility of the way the work is made to others, which you don't have an interaction or a conversation going on with, and there's a kind of divide between that relationship between the contractor has to share the same values and principles. And it sounds like you two had that special relationship occurring in your work, which I said to my husband recently, I've never worked with another female contractor before. And I wonder if some of the issues that I've had would be different working with a female-led landscape company, because there's not many out there.
There aren't many. We need more and more strong women in this field, because I think we carry this sensitivity, and not to speak negatively of the wonderful guys that help get this work done too, but there is something about a caretaking, nurturing, kind of long, generationally minded view of the decisions you're making and what you're doing and how it's impacting things that we can really cultivate in ourselves and bring to our clients.
And it is in no way about excluding men from the conversation.
No.
And it's about creating rich ecology in terms of a balanced environment, right?
Yes.
Men and well, gender's kind of connected together. It's like,
Yes.
it's about being healthy in your complexity, because we know complexity is resilient.
And I think that we have gotten to work on 2 projects together in terms of design through construction, and having the ethos that we both have is rare, and having the trust too, like knowing what Bethany has designed, and we are design build also within our business. But when we build for Bethany, trusting that when it goes to what's in the ground, goes in the ground with a consciousness. I don't say that in a hippie woo-woo way. I mean, like,
But
okay,
it's not bad either.
like, okay, we're bringing in, a couple inches of compost in this area where we really had to do some hard grading. And then we're also bringing in ecto and endo mycorrhiza so that we can start to reestablish the soil web. And we're continuously stretching ourselves and talking about, which is why we started this podcast. How do we do this better? Like, what sort of mulch are we choosing? What sort of materials are we choosing? And getting on the same page, because it is both about the construction and the design side. And as a female contractor, as a licensed female contractor, it's not what you're tested on when you go to get your contractor's license. It's not what you're shown if you've worked for somebody else. It's easy, but people resort back to what they're used to doing or have been shown before. And so choosing to do a different way, I've noticed in teaching our team, it's the why. Like, this is why we're doing this. So we're going to choose to do this in a different way. For instance, this week we had a mulch change. I sent a guy with a cup of mulch and I said, go buy this exact mulch. You know what showed up? Something completely different. I was shocked. It was my own team. And you know what I said today when I sent the same guy? I said, I noticed on that last job that you showed up with fine dark fir and I spec'd airport bark. But I want you to know why I spec'd airport bark. And I want you to know about the soil ecology. And I want you to know about how I'm thinking about rebuilding that soil, which made me make the decision to choose A over B. And so he got it. That education of the why is, in a lot of ways, it feels nurturing. So it feels female. It feels nurturing to say, we're going to do it this way. Don't just go do it. Do it in this way because of this reason. And it's empowering.
There are some conversations around the constructs of professionalism and how professionalism is carried down generationally. So where there's a framework in which people are trained to do things and that is given status as a professional standard, it can be seen that when you move outside of that, is that you are rogue, or you're flaky, or like you might be good, or maybe it works for you, but it's not necessarily as authentic. And maybe you can get away with it, but it's not what a professional, there's a challenge that comes up that I have been challenged and confronted with through my career, despite being very successful and regarded and respected as well. And it's this idea that when you have professional training that is run to be a professional in the teaching, you have to have a qualification from that professional standard. So there's a cycle of repeating behavior and understanding of the institution of professionalism. And so when you try to step outside or challenge those methods or ways, you're often called unprofessional. And there's can be comments made about it not being professional or not meeting those sorts of things. And it takes a rogue or a bit of courage or a different framework to be able to regard yourself as meeting your own professional standards and actually feeling confident and old enough and wise enough to actually say, I have evidence. I actually am a professional and I question and challenge the fertilizers that you're using on this job. And I don't want to build my garden this way. This is how I will build. It takes a long time to get to that level. Whereas if you're working with a contractor where you have that trust already and you can build that evidence, it's a lot easier than to try and continually challenge people, independent companies, to change their behaviors and their professionalism, which it comes from a really good place. They want to do well. They want to be the best. They want to deliver certainty. And so the things they've been told will give certainty. They want to follow those methods. And the way you do it might feel less safe or more risky or more floaty or hippie, because people like absolute answers that this is the way you do it. And we know that gardening works in this complex variation of circumstances. And so a professional always walks into the room and says, what is different about this place? What am I seeing? And then you apply your thinking to go, well, in this situation, I'm going to go this way. And that's harder. It's harder to have to apply fresh thinking to each situation. And of course, things repeat as well. So it gets easier, but there is not like one answer that you can just apply over and over and over again. And when we do that, we end up perpetuating the things we're trying to avoid, right? By repeating old behaviors. If you say, this is the way, you fall into the trap of then creating situations that it doesn't apply to.
Right.
So this is like expressing the complexity of the challenges of really high level professionalism, which is where you continually question yourself and your work and your practice and the people who work with you and ask why, which is exactly what you're saying, right? Why am I asking you to do this? Why am I doing this when last week this was fine? Why have I now changed it to that?
Do you recall early on some of those first challenges to yourself to ask why, or to go rogue, or to make a recommendation or a request for something different, and how that went over?
I feel that I walked into the world quite innocent and quite naive and quite unaware of the barriers that were in front of me. And I think I didn't notice them because I assumed better of people in situations. And I think that's a gift. And so I never had resentment or bitterness towards them. I didn't walk into them and feel that they were holding me down, because I was just like, oh, you think that? Right? Oh, that's interesting. Why?
Yes.
Because I was brought up on why. I wasn't brought up on absolute idea of, I didn't have an absolute idea, and I didn't see the world as fixed, and I didn't see it as being kind of finite or anything like that. And I had an idealistic view about what the world could be. And so I just walked in with that why question and how and oh gosh, and but what about this? And that questioning and inquiring. And so therefore that really works, right? It really works when it's probably really, really annoying for other people.
I think people love to share their knowledge. I can definitely relate to that.
So it's that, like, if you're a learner, and that's why we always call our practices studios, because it's meant to be about learning and growing and growth. And we expect everyone in the studio for that to be a different journey. We don't have a person or an idea we produce. Hopefully people become their own idea or version of themselves within the environment. And so if you're a learner, I think that's the safest way to enter the world as a rogue.
Wisdom right there. Where have you seen practices in your own studio shift from maybe what you thought was safe and the right thing early on, and then you've continued to ask those whys and changed and learned? And maybe this is even a fresh question in the last year or two. Where are you shifting because you've asked more questions and discovered a new way?
We are continually getting taken into traps of, you start an idea which is interesting and challenging and new. So you might start a line of inquiry. So for instance, local stone, we started looking for more local stone materials, which we don't have large access to large materials of. So we started using a lot of the local crazy paving and stone material, to the point that now that material is becoming really overused and is becoming scarce and is becoming really expensive and is becoming a really difficult material to get your hands on, because it's so cool.
It's so cool you've affected the market, and now you can't get
not
yours.
just us, but other people's thinking and people being able to see, let's use local material. That's a great idea, right? And so that philosophy shifting in an industry then becomes something that needs to be challenged. Well, what else are we doing? At some point, that resource is going to be finite. What do we use after that? What are other ways that we can look at that material? And how do we treat different things? Absolutism is never a good idea. You have to keep shifting and moving and turning yourself around, because something that you've done a lot of can become success, can lead to failure. As things get bigger, then you challenge your scale and you question what you're doing. You have to find the meaning in the work that you're doing. And sometimes that's challenging when the world seems crazy and fragile and difficult to understand and find a path forward. You have to, with each project, say, what is the meaning in this? What in this project is upholding something that I believe in? And sometimes it won't necessarily be the land or the landscape. It might be what the project is making space for. It might be that the project is making space for art and voices that otherwise would be unseen, and creating a place for other people to shine and connect, or other people to occupy. And so it might not be the physicality of your work that has an influence, but it might be how your work makes space for other things as well. We'll walk into each room with an open mind and go, what can I do in this space that creates something that hopefully shifts thinking and ideas in a positive framework in some way. And sometimes things are just about a happy, intimate, personal relationship, just actually making someone who's going through a difficult situation's life a bit easier for a while. Just making someone feel happier and have hope is slowing their life down, making them see things differently.
When I hear you say that, I'm hearing that there is probably a deep process that you have that starts to onboard clients, and there's probably a series of information that you extract from a conversation that is your introductory conversation. I'm curious what it is that you're starting to take in when you start to work with a client and start to work with a site. What are those things that your brain starts to ask about?
I think it's, why have you come to me? What are you looking for? And that can be really different for different people. And sometimes it can take a little while to really work out what it is that someone wants from you, what it is that they're really looking for, and why they came to you, not to someone else, why that connection was important to them, and what was it that they saw in your work. Because our work often looks like a particular type of thing, but it's many things because we work with many people. So people might have seen one thing in your work, and another person might have seen another thing, and people see you as many things because we're complex, right? And so what is it that that person needs? They might not even know why they've come to see you. A person might not even know why they've actually come to you in the first place, and they might not know what they're looking for. And you're just trying to find something that will create something special, like a moment in everything that creates something special for someone else.
I wonder if you could share a story. I feel a little silly because I don't recollect all the details, but maybe I'll say enough that it'll jog your memory. We were chatting when I was there in person with you about the semi-recent flooding that had been going on in the region, and about some of the interventions for land, for grading and for drainage, and some of these interventions that you had brought to, I believe, to private residences, but in a way to help demonstrate some different kinds of patterning that could then translate maybe out into the agricultural world and into wider land and water management, maybe also in an effort to demonstrate something other than a knee-jerk reaction that would maybe cause people to go in a earth damaging way. And if I can share a little story from here in the Northwest, we've had the last few years some pretty damaging ice storms and situations that have caused a lot of tree fall and a lot of property damage and branches falling from the sky. Of course, it's terrifying for humans to live underneath a bunch of tall trees and see them coming down and causing damage. But there's been an instinctual knee-jerk reaction among a lot of people to go and want to just remove trees preemptively because they're so terrified of something going wrong. And so I'm trying to recall your stories about these instances of flooding and kind of massive water impacts on the earth. And I don't remember enough of the details now, but I want to hear it again. And I want to hear maybe your lessons learned from these projects working with clients.
So soil is a big passion for me, but so is water. Water is really misunderstood in terms of flow and movement, in terms of through how it breathes. So I consider water as a breath, right? So those of us that work with the land, we understand that the way water moves through the cycle and through the soil and draws up through plants and is received by leaves, and this breathing breath and the seasonal breath and flow of water is something which cannot be tied to a line on a map, and exists not just in the sky and in rivers and lakes. It exists beneath the ground in aquifers and things like that. And so one of the things that drives flooding risk as well is this lack of understanding that water is a flow and a movement through a system, like a breath that moves in and out through soils. If we don't have water sitting beneath our soils, we don't have drawdown into these systems underneath. And so the response to flooding is to go, water, take it, move it, get it out to the oceans to remove it, which then exacerbates the problem because our ground reserves dry up even more, so we get more water movement flashing across the surface, less products underneath. In terms of trying to start these conversations, we can talk about it in a kind of dry, educate people on that understanding of water as a breath, but there's a point you're going to capture certain people in that conversation. So this is where I think poetry and narrative in terms of work is really important in creating. We're working on a little version of this at the moment in one of the projects where we're talking to the architect and there's a little seasonal stream that runs through and I'm like, I want to work with the stream. And he's like, well, it's not a stream. You mean the water flowing over? And I'm like, yes, that's what I mean. I want to do something with it. And he's like, that goes through the site and I've got things there. And I'm like, just let me do it. And he's like, okay, if you want to do it, go for it. Do what you want. Like, he knows me well enough that I will anyway. On one of our projects, what we looked at doing was a client has a water reservoir. And so when you have a water reservoir and the water goes up and down, people are like, the water's low, the water's high, there's too much water. And so it's seen as something that it's meant to be at a certain level when it's not meant to be at a certain level. It's meant to come and go, right? Because that's what breath does. It goes and it rises and it falls and it rises and it falls. I think the project that you're thinking about is where within the reservoir we've created stone steps which go through the lake that then rise and fall below the different seasonal levels. So when the water is really high, you only see the top stones, so they are like every second step apart. And then when the water comes down, you've got a bouncing stone path that goes over to the little space in the middle. So rather than showing the water as rising and falling as a problem, you're showing it as a delight. So you take water coming and going and you play with this idea and you allow it so that people anticipate that flow of water. And we've done other ones where we'll create a valley that is beautiful with stones and beautiful swale lake reservoir that created lines within the contours of it, which are marked out in the landscape so that when it flows up, there's this anticipation of the water rising. And so the way our minds perceive this increasing water and decreasing water, we are taught and trained by our response to the organization within the landscape of the layering of the way we lay out stones, like measures within a landscape. It's symbolic, but that symbolic gesture reinforms our mind in a poetical way that is both beautiful and delightful and playful for children and adults. And so it's this idea that as designers, we use our skills of beauty to create stories and narratives that expand beyond a simple kind of dry schoolyard lesson. And they use our work in a way that's like, it's a beautiful work, but it has an artistry and a story and a poetry to it that then creates different stories. And this relates to things like solstice as well, like the organization of trees when we're doing reforestation, creating tidy edges, which then have little avenues through it which line up to the solstice and to the seasonal appropriateness and remind us that there's this magic moment when the light will come through the trees. And so then the wildness behind has a human relevance, which gives that kind of perseverance in the human mind as being treasured and precious and sacred. And so it's like taking our work from just being a decorative element to using the physicality and organization of things to tell deeper stories that will hopefully, when we're dead, people will go, do you know the story about this? You know, that can live beyond a single action or the gardener's hand, and they can actually create stories that people might not remember you. They'll probably think that he was really clever.
Whoever that man was that did that.
Man, he was really cool.
Mother Nature and her assistants. I think we've got a good feminine group that's been handling these things for a long time.
Yeah.
I would love to know who some of your most treasured inspirations are, whether that's from, childhood. It sounds like even your parents were those inspirations from day one that taught you about these relationships with the land. But as you think of the arc of your career, and your vocation more than career, but your vocation in the world of interacting with these places and materials and rhythms and reasons. Who inspires you? Who do you learn from? Who do you love to, and living or dead even, right? It can be of all time. Who do you find excitement from?
It's interesting because I like to discover things which I don't know. So I tend to look for things that are outside of my comfort, maybe. I feel that Beth Chatto in England is a person who you will see her name listed in many people's big names like Piet Udoff and all these Bernard Trainer and all these people. They all came through her garden, came through her studio. And so I see her as a role model in that not only, it's not even just about the garden that she created, but she created a school of thought that basically changed the way many people practice landscape. And so she led as a teacher. And so I really admire her from that. And she wrote letters to Bev McConnell, who created an amazing garden here. She was encouraging people. She had students here. She was giving people the confidence and the hope and the vision and the nourishment that she could, through writing by pen without internet or social media, she was influencing the foundational way that people thought and looked at landscape. And I think that's pretty powerful. I've read some things, Roberto Bill Marx. I find his work has a socialism, and when you read lectures that he did, there's things about which door the gardener comes through, about the social fabric of how I heard they were talking at a conference down this way, and they were talking about labourers and giving better pay to labourers and acknowledging them. And I'm like, even the language around calling someone a labourer when it's their hands that are making the design decisions, this is something that we should challenge, right? We're all landscapers, and the way language positions people and creates hierarchy around us, the designer being the special kind of a person, the person who works with the hands. In our studio, we talk about the people making the designers as well, and they're part of our design team. They're not separate from our design team. They are our design team. Whether you work with your hands with a pen or on a computer or in the soil, you are part of the making and creating of the space. And so I really liked some of the writings that he did about the language of where does the landscape gardener walk through. As the architect, they walk through the front door, and as the gardener, they walk through the back. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
I think we have this beauty as landscapers where we are both invited through the front door and the back door, and it is good to walk in both worlds and to come in both back doors and front doors, as long as you take your boots times.
They'll be quite muddy.
Yeah, totally.
It feels like you have such a deep ethos to what you do, and it seems like it's been cultured. And I'm sure a lot of this ends up in practical decisions that you make. And hearing that you are so deeply connected to both soil and water, I'm so curious what your practice is when you prescribe on the landscape and you have to build and move earth. And what are you prescribing when you're rebuilding something you've had to kind of tear apart?
Because of my interest in soil and stone as well, then starts to feed into that, because it starts to become part of the foundation of the soil and all of these things. I think it has formed some of my aesthetics in terms of response to landscape. So generally I try to not remove soil from site and do introduce nutrient to site, but limit the amount of volume of soil. So when I design, I try to work with what's on site. So for instance, working on a project at the moment where we're working with the architect, and they were working to nestle the house into the landscape beautifully, so it had a really gentle feeling, but the amount of volume of soil that was going to come out of it. So we sat together and we agreed that the house would be lifted and pulled back to reduce that volume of soil coming out, and so that the amount of soil that came out I could then reuse to reintegrate the landscape back into the site. The conversations about pushing and pulling and disrupting that soil, because the consequences of disrupting soil is you can't just put it back on. Like
Right.
the formation of a structure of a soil, and we have a lot of steep sites and we have earthquake risks and erosion risks and things like that we're dealing. And if you can't just dig it out and stick it back on. I don't like big ugly retaining walls. They're really icky and they spend all the money on things that it's not fun money. And so I spent a lot of time really developing good skills in the management of contour, understanding, trying to increase my understanding of the engineering of slope, of how piles work and holding force, how using rocks to use their gradient force back onto severe slopes can help assist in the stabilization, and how we can use quite soft, meaningful things to create force which secures land, how we can use timber to create wood layers across the landscape to reduce erosion while plants are establishing. So a lot of the aesthetic of my landscape, the contoured form, it comes from me loving landscape. It's not that I won't make something flat because we need flat places, but I do think if you make everything flat, I do call them the flat earthers. We don't need to iron everything out. Part of working in a landscape is understanding contour, which is complex, but it's also beautiful. It's like pottery and clay, and learning to disrupt it as little as possible, but still make stunning spaces, and learning how verticality can create these incredibly amazing palettes that you can plant across, and you can get these really beautiful volumes for less square meterage on plan. When your plan area is this big, your planting plan is like that big. When
Yeah,
you plant
good
on a
point.
your degree of diversity is like massively expanded when you plant on a slope. So it's very easy to persuade people of this. And I continue to be challenged by people I work with, like, why are we doing this? Or they, me, why? I don't know if I like that, or should we be working with these people, or what's that? I'm like, oh, I really don't want to be the judge of you. Do you know what I mean? The judge and
Yes.
jury of everybody else. And so I'm like, well, what can we do to find good in it? It's just that questioning and process, which is universal. We can all apply that. It doesn't matter where in the world we work, we can apply good process to our thinking and to our relationships and to that continuous questioning, challenging, and having other people question and challenge you. If I did it this way, would it be better? What can you do that brings it better? So other people feeding in their knowledge and their skills is why I like to work in a studio environment, because you get all these other brilliant people asking you and making you think in ways that you don't think, because they're different to you, and so they challenge you in different ways.
Well, and I feel like one of the most beautiful parts of even when you get into a flat landscape, like a neighborhood that is pretty flattened out, is that a landscape is never flat. You always have opportunity to create terrace or to work with the landform, to move water, to settle water, to keep it on site. Here in the Northwest, we have such a wet, rainy 9 months, and then all of a sudden we have no rain. And planning to kind of sequester the few drops that it feels like we get during the summer months is this treat of an opportunity to utilize downspouts, to work with the water within what looks like a flat yard, but there's probably 6 to 12 inches of elevation change that really can be curated to create a natural system.
Absolutely. And it is also about dormancy, right? Like, where people are very understanding of winter dormancy when it comes to snow, but they're not as understanding about dormancy when it comes to heat and water. And, like that there is a dormant season where the water does down and become really scarce and precious. And that is part of the rhythm of a place, is that dryness. And so how you tell the story of that in your garden and how you capture it for where it is most needed and most precious, like our food or where we pick our flowers or something that's particularly special, or our most intimate spaces, how you draw that water close into you is a story to be told.
I'm curious about materialism just because you have such a distinct style. And as you're picking materials, you've talked about kind of the ethos of once you start sourcing local materials, you see that they become hot, trendy. And so then you're always kind of thinking about what the next material that could be utilized so that once things become over harvested or too expensive, how are you designing for the future? And I'm curious if there are materials right now that you're ruminating on as you're thinking about the next future. And I know that's a local question mostly, but right now in landscape, we're really challenging the idea of concrete and steel just because of the carbon footprint of them. And we're also challenging the idea of a lot of boulders because of tearing apart mountains to get to them. And I'm just curious how you're starting to think about material with those challenges.
So there's probably two things. The first thing is less, and the second thing is less and diversity creates resilience. I find material probably the hardest thing to fix because it's a resource, right? So it's really precious. And so every time you use it, it's like you need to do things and you need to build things. But then every time you build anything, you're using something. You're using the resources of people's hands, you're using stone resources and physical resources and things and transportation. And so you're consuming when you build. And that is the fact, that is the reality. However we build, we are consuming in some way. And so one of the key things is to treat the build as a precious resource. So to treat it as when you build something, you build less and you build it beautifully. So when you make something in a landscape, you don't build just acres and acres and acres of it. You build one staircase that is utterly exquisite and absolutely beautiful, and everything else is just soft, as opposed to needing to build lots and lots and lots of walls and things. So you build gently and you treat the process of building and the process of creating as something that is a high value and hopefully enduring thing that you have made, as opposed to a fashion thing that's going to move fast and quickly through. We don't do a lot of fences, we don't do a lot of boundary and formal senses, but we might create two posts or a single wall with a couple of gates behind it and then all tree and soft. So I use a lot of folly in my landscape where I build one big, beautiful thing, but I don't spend any money on the rest of the boundary. That's all done very minimally and just enough to hold the fort for whatever needs to be done to make sure children and dogs are safe and all of those things are done. But the one wall that we do will hold the center of the composition and will be this beautiful wall. And it will feel special and treasured. And so I kind of elevate the singularity of something so that it does a lot and it really powers up. And how much you can get from just two posts at the end of something creates so much in terms of interest and wondering what's there. And it's total folly, but it does more than a whole big wall that says there is nothing beyond here. And it creates so much more inquiry and imagination and storytelling, right? In terms of just two posts that could have been there for 100 years or could have been there for a week. So folly, I think, is a really great way to create, define space, define use of space, create imagination, boundaries, limitations that are broader or shorter, or and to control people's perception of things in a way that makes those resources more precious, if that makes sense. Restraint on myself means that when I do something, I might power it up a little bit even, because I'll be like, well, I'm building a wall. Whoa. It's really special.
Yeah, just making sure the impact is there so you're doing less.
Yeah.
That makes so much sense.
The power of restraint as such a valuable component of design, especially these days, as the idea of more and endless has just captured our entire culture. You can have it all. You can, at the tip of your fingertips, buy whatever you want, ask for whatever you want, create whatever you want. You can now just anything. Your imagination, you can just get it, which we know is not totally true, and we know is very depleting of resources and health of all levels when we treat it like that. But that's the idea, that anyone can choose anything and do anything. And so the beauty of restraint and of a trusted advisor, a designer that can come in with the knowledge that you don't need everything, you don't need more, you don't even need all the different pieces that you might have once thought you had to have a complete garden. You can actually have a really simple, thoughtful, well-made well-constructed choice. And that in and of itself is that special anchor that can create a quality of space that's unlike everyone else's cookie cutter of everything they've added to their cart and then some and spread around their landscape. And I think that's kind of the beauty of this era of taking a deep breath and releasing ourselves from needing to do it the way it's always been done or needing to purchase and consume and build more. What can it take to touch it carefully and with intention and make something special that has value and life in it and that makes us feel a little bit more human and less like a consuming machine? So
And that oneness of something, that specialness of something, it's so much more delightful. And it captures people more than the everything. The everything is overwhelming. I can't remember who said it, but there's some famous quote where it's like, what do you have that they don't have? And it's like, enough. Enough. I've got enough.
And I'm hearing in this conversation, you're like, when we do reforestation projects, we honor the way that the sun hits through the forest for solstice. When I create a fence line, I create one large, very impactful wall that becomes a very special part of the fence line. And it's just that wall. There clearly is this element within you that is understanding what enough is, and then also showcasing impact in a very minimal way that probably lands so well and so beautifully, which is why your work is so gorgeous, is because it's that one big line across a page that is so elegant.
And it releases people from themselves, right? People are relieved when they don't have to have any more. Like, oh, that's so much easier. I can just do that. They actually like to be told that they don't have to have everything and be everything.
Oh, that's so good. Xanthe, what's on the horizon? What can we expect from you in the coming bit?
Hopefully, and keep working hard. I still find quite a lot of joy in my work. And I find that through the COVID period, and I think we all re-questioned everything that we were doing and unpacked and restarted and looked at the world anew. And I came back to that for me, the important thing is to maintain my connection with the physicality of my work, with the spade, with the mud on the site, with the what's actually happening and how are things being done, and therefore why are they being done and how can we do them differently, and just that human and the joy of working together, and how much my joy from my work is from working with the people around me and that collaborative success of getting in it and getting on it and working hard and being challenged and then achieving. That's my happy place. So I'm just going to keep working hard.
And writing too, it sounds like.
Yeah,
book on the
and
horizon.
telling story through my work.
Well, I know where to find you on Instagram because I love seeing you there. But for anyone listening in, how can they find you in this wonderful world if they're not happening to be in New Zealand sometime real soon?
Well, my darling parents gave me a wonderful name that starts with an X. So my name Xanthe is quite easy to find. So if you put Xanthe White Landscape, you can find me.
And
It's
that's
great.
Xanthe, Xanthe
Yeah.
White. Did
And
like the
white.
color.
It was to make up for white.
I love it. It's a special name. You'll never forget it once you've heard it, you know. And your gardens are delightful as well. So I'm excited for anyone that might not have known of your work before to discover you and follow along. And thank you for being just an inspiration personally to me. I feel like you're describing Beth and her letters across the ocean. I feel like you're doing your own version, sending your photos and inspirations out into the internet. And I'm over here on the West Coast catching them and just delighted by them and encouraged. So thanks. You're influencing practice all over the place.
Thank you.
It's so true. I really have appreciated listening to you, Xanthe. It's been quite beautiful to hear from your wisdom and your many, many years of experience and how the practice has made you think and how the practice and your interpretation of it has made you want to influence people, both in your business and those that you get to work with or those that happen upon your gardens. And I really appreciate that. So thank you. And I really can't wait to dive into both of your books, The Good Dirt. I mean, this sounds like my Bible. I'm such a soil geek, and The Natural Garden. And I really can't wait to see this, as you say, the Bible of landscape design that you're working on that really talks about so much more of your theory. And I really just look forward to that. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
I appreciate being given a space to speak. It's a real privilege and makes me feel special. And to talk to people who are like-minded and really open and who really care about their practice and work. So thank you.
Our honor. Thank you so much. Until next time, let's do it again.
Thank you.